By 2050, the global population will reach 9.8 billion. That demographic growth guarantees a massive spike in the global demand for dietary protein. This bar chart shows Earth's available agricultural resources. Traditional agriculture currently consumes roughly 70% of all global freshwater and viable ice-free land. We are operating against a hard mathematical ceiling. Current livestock farming requires a massive physical footprint. There is not enough remaining geographical space on the planet to multiply facilities to match demand. To maintain our current agricultural model through 2050, we will require an additional 110 million tons of feed protein strictly to sustain our farm animals. To feed an expanding human population, we must first secure enough protein to feed the livestock we intend to eat, using land and water reserves that no longer exist. Scaling the traditional livestock system further is physically impossible. Food strategists are being forced to pivot toward entirely different biological models to generate agricultural protein. The primary alternative currently being investigated by food engineers is the mass cultivation of many livestock, specifically edible insects. This requires optimizing entomophagy. Entomophagy is the consumption of insects as food, a dietary practice already utilized by roughly 2 billion people globally. This chart tracks the terrestrial distribution of consumed insect species. It is highly adopted across the neotropics and afrotropical regions. Notice the stark contrast in the Palearctic and North American markets, where adoption rates dropped to 13.6% and 2.1% respectively. In high-adoption urban centers, insects are routinely prepared, marketed, and sold as a standard consumer staple alongside traditional proteins. Yet modern Western food systems continue to treat insect consumption as a cultural taboo, rather than a highly efficient agricultural crop. Bringing insect protein into Western markets requires solving a systemic supply chain challenge, standardizing an ancient, localized food source for modern industrial distribution. To industrialize this resource, we have to start with a strict biological definition of what actually qualifies as an edible insect. This diagram outlines the rigid zoological definition of an insect, separating them from other arthropods. Classification requires specific morphological traits: antennae, exactly 6 legs, and triple tagmatization, the biological grouping of segments into 3 distinct body parts: the head, thorax, and abdomen. Of the estimated 5.5 million insect species on Earth, a fraction, roughly 2,000 species, have been historically proven safe for human consumption. This hexagonal grid maps those edible species into their primary taxonomic orders, identifying which biological categories dominate human consumption. 2 orders make up the bulk of global volume: Coleoptera, which includes beetles, and Lepidoptera, comprising caterpillars and moths. Once harvested and processed, these specific taxonomic groups yield dense nutritional volume, readily sold in open markets, with the exact same utility as conventional legumes. Isolating the correct taxonomy and verifying a history of safe human consumption is the strict, non-negotiable prerequisite for designing any industrial mass farming operation. The biochemical output of these selected species is highly concentrated. Edible insects yield a protein density ranging from 40 to 75% by mass. This bar chart compares protein density against conventional agriculture. Insect yield significantly outpaces the outputs of cattle, poultry, and soy. Mapped to a radar chart, the secondary nutritional profile emerges. Insects provide optimal omega-3 ratios and dense micronutrients, specifically outperforming beef in zinc and riboflavin. The true advantage lies in the environmental cost of producing those nutrients. This is measured by the feed conversion ratio, an agricultural metric tracking the exact mass of feed required to produce 1 unit of animal body mass. Insects act as highly efficient biological engines, actively converting organic waste and agricultural byproducts into dense, high-yield macronutrients. This flow diagram illustrates the efficiency gap. Crickets require up to 4 times less feed volume than cattle to produce the exact same amount of dietary protein. Moving this capability to an industrial scale introduces strict safety parameters. Farmed insects must undergo processing with the exact same microbiological and sanitation protocols applied to traditional meat. There is also an unavoidable biological risk: cross-reactivity. Cross-reactivity occurs when the proteins found in insects trigger a severe immune response in consumers who already have existing shellfish or crustacean allergies. Furthermore, the traditional culinary presentation of whole, highly visible insects requires heavy modification and processing to achieve viability in Western supply chains. If successfully industrialized and regulated, insects offer the most efficient bioconversion system available to offset the impending global protein deficit. The sudden, unexpected collision between theoretical biological efficiency and the reality of modern Western markets occurred directly in Northern Europe. In late 2017, the European Union formally legalized the commercial marketing and sale of insect-based products for human consumption. Finland quickly became the primary test environment. The government and major food corporations aggressively attempted to scale commercial entomophagy for a skeptical public. The flagship product of this initiative was Fazer cricket bread, a commercially baked good deliberately engineered to hide the insect morphology from the consumer. Every loaf contained 70 ground crickets, processed entirely into flour. This delivered an invisible 5 grams of supplemental protein without confronting the buyer visually. The initial launch yielded nationwide supermarket sellouts and international marketing recognition, including a Cannes Lion Award. But by early 2019, production halted. The flagship bread was completely discontinued, and the associated regional insect farms rapidly shut down. Legal approval and heavy marketing are insufficient to sustain a new food category. The product collapsed because it lacked a resilient underlying infrastructure. The Finnish business model suffered an immediate, critical supply chain breakdown. Local insect farmers lacked access to commercial, cost-effective feed blends designed specifically for crickets, severely stunting domestic agricultural production. Consequently, manufacturers were forced to import processed cricket flour from Holland, incurring an unsustainable, exorbitant cost of nearly €100 per kilo. This animated scale demonstrates the economic imbalance. The exorbitant raw material cost completely outweighed the €3.99 retail price of the bread, breaking the basic math of the business model. The production line also encountered a severe environmental failure. The biology of the insect was completely mismatched with the physical climate. The tropical cricket species simply stopped eating and growing in the exceptionally dry, cold Nordic air. To keep the biological engines running, farmers had to purchase and install highly expensive industrial humidifiers, systematically wiping out whatever profit margins still remained. Scaling sustainable food technology requires localized bioengineering. You cannot drop a tropical organism into a cold supply chain, import your raw materials, and expect the economics to survive. The final mechanism that destroyed the Finnish insect market had nothing to do with supply chains. It was behavioral psychology. The consumer market rapidly crashed against food neophobia. Food neophobia is defined as the deep-seated psychological reluctance of consumers to eat novel, culturally unfamiliar, or historically taboo foods. Consumers eagerly bought the commercial cricket bread exactly once. It functioned primarily as a novelty purchase or a social media stunt, rather than a genuine shift in dietary habits. The retail metrics exposed the harsh reality. Repeat purchases were practically zero. Sustained consumer demand completely collapsed after the initial trial period. The objective data regarding protein density and environmental conservation were simply not powerful enough to override the psychological disgust factor inherent in Western food culture. If bioconversion is going to scale, future ventures must engineer product formulations that actively neutralize this cultural friction over time, rather than just hiding the ingredient once. Solving the 2050 protein crisis depends on food engineers mastering human behavioral psychology with the same precision they apply to the biology of the insect.